G'day, welcome to the Digger History Podcast. I'm your host Keith. When we talk about Anzac Day, we usually think about World War One and in particular the Gallipoli campaign. But in this episode, I'm going to talk about the ANZACs of World War Two, particularly the Greece and Crete campaigns. But before we go into it, I'm just going to briefly explain the ANZACs and what ANZAC means, how it came about, because I've looked at the demographics of this podcast and 36% of listeners are from Australia or New Zealand, meaning the other 64% of listeners are not from Australia or New Zealand. So there's a chance that these people may have never heard of ANZAC and not sure what ANZAC is all about. So I just want to briefly explain ANZAC to our listeners from outside of Australia and New Zealand. So during World War One, Australian and New Zealand and troops from other Commonwealth nations as well were sent to Egypt to train and to build up in Egypt. And the Aussies and the Kiwis kind of got bundled together, and it started off just as a Clark, just shortening things, making an acronym, and he wrote the name ANZAC, as short for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. So this abbreviation then went on to become the official name of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. The ANZACs took part in the Dardanelles campaign, which I have done a couple of episodes. If you ever look back at the Dardanelles campaign and Gallipoli, to go into a bit more detail, but I guess most famously known for the landings at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915, and the 25th of April has it became known as ANZAC Day, the anniversary of the landings of the ANZACs at Gallipoli. So every year we commemorate this date. It's kind of not just about the landings at Gallipoli, but it's now about like all Australian and New Zealand service personnel that have served our countries. So just recently, last week we commemorated the 111th anniversary of the landing of the ANZAC at Gallipoli. So we've just had ANZAC Day just gone by. So I know a lot of you guys, from Australia and New Zealand are going, yeah, we already know this. Why you're telling us this is for the 64% of listeners to this podcast that are not from Australia and New Zealand. So after Gallipoli, the ANZACs were also involved in the Western Front in the First World War. But towards the end of the war, kind of both countries still involved, but not like together as much as they had been in Gallipoli. During World War II, both nations, Australia and New Zealand, joined the war within hours of Britain declaring war on Germany. But for the first year or so of the war, never really fought together as they had done in the first year of World War One. They were both involved, but doing separate things. But then during the Greek campaign, the Australians and New Zealanders um, joined together again to fight together as a division against the ANZACs of the Second World War. Um, and that's the campaign I want to talk to you about in this episode. And the campaign itself, it kind of this episode kind of fits in a little bit with my last episode about Tobruk, the siege of Tobruk. So if you haven't heard that, um, go back and have a listen to it. You don't need to listen to it before you listen to this one, but they kind of fit in together. Firstly, because they happened around the same time, and secondly, because they happened on the opposite sides of the Mediterranean. So basically, just across the ditch from each other, as we Australians like to say. Across the ditch, meaning kind of an Australian term for just over the water. So we would say that New Zealand is just over the ditch. So in my last episode about Tobruk, I started with how the British, including Australians and Indians, um, were based in Egypt, and they pushed the Italians back across Libya, across the desert, and yeah, pushed the Italians back westward towards towards Tripoli. And after that, they kind of thought, well, the Italians are contained, so they moved a lot of the troops to Greece, which was where there was a threat in Greece. So a lot of the troops that were moved from Libya across the ditch to Greece to defend Greece. So that's where this episode kind of ties in a little bit with my last episode. It's not like a sequel, just you know the timelines kind of match up a bit. And if you look at a map, you see the map in North Africa. You've got Libya up the top there, and to the east of Libya, you've got Egypt, and north of that you've got the Mediterranean. So if you go across the ditch, across the Mediterranean, you've got all your Mediterranean countries, Greece, Italy, Crete. So in the grand scheme of things, they're actually not that far, not that far away. So that's a bit of a broad overview of where we are and where it kind of ties in with my last episode. So let's talk about the timeline now. So um, the Italians entered the war on the side of Germany in 1940, and in October 1940, the Italians keen to dominate the Mediterranean invaded Greece. Now, Greece was a neutral country, and Britain was a guarantor of the Greeks' neutrality. So the British needed to send military aid to support Greece. The issue was there was still a big campaign going on in North Africa um, with with the British and Commonwealth troops pushing the Italians back west across Libya. So the Greeks were left on their own for a while to defend Greece, and that they did quite well. They pushed back the Italian invasion, but then as similar to what happened in Libya, the Germans became involved, and the Germans sent troops into Greece to assist in invading Greece. So in March 1941, the North Africa campaign seemed to be fairly stable. The British and Commonwealth forces had pushed the Italians back towards Tripoli, and they kind of like held them there. And I guess, look, it's not like they didn't perceive the Italians as a threat, but I guess they are prioritising, and they needed to go and support Greece. So 2/3 of the Australian 6th Division, which was in Libya at the time, was then sent to Greece, leaving basically a garrison in Libya, as I explained in my last episode about the siege of Tobruk. So you've got 2/3 of the Australian Division, and then you've got New Zealanders and more Australians and more Commonwealth troops that were based in Egypt, also sent to Greece. So all up we had about 65,000 troops sent to Greece, the majority being Australian and New Zealand, with a few other Commonwealth countries in there as well, but the majority were ANZAC troops. By this stage, the Germans had actually staged a big invasion of Greece. So the few months beforehand, when the Italians were invading Greece or attempted to invade Greece, they had smaller numbers, and they were trying to invade over winter too. So they were bogged down a lot, but with the Germans joining in, and also with the weather more favourably on the invaders' side. But by the time the ANZACs got there, they were basically fighting a rearguard action. So you've got all through April, British, Australian, New Zealand, Commonwealth forces being pushed out of Greece. The ANZACs are fighting a rearguard action, but the outcome was inevitable. Greece would have to be evacuated. So on the 24th of April 1941, there was a massive evacuation. Big ships, small ships, little boats, just evacuating people, just evacuating soldiers from Greece. And about 50,000 ANZACs were evacuated from Greece. Now, some of these troops went to Crete, but some went to Egypt. It kind of depended on where the ship or the boat was going. So it was kind of like a mishmash of people being evacuated to either Egypt or Crete. So about 26,000 ANZACs were evacuated to Crete, and the majority were actually New Zealanders. So there are actually more New Zealanders than Australians, which would make it the first campaign where the ANZACs worked together, where there were more Kiwis than Aussies. So the evacuation of Greece was supported heavily by like Greek fishermen, Greek civilians with their own boats, just helping save people, helping them get troops off Greece. So it was an amazing effort from the Greek population in assisting to get the ANZACs and the Commonwealth forces off Greece. So I guess you can kind of compare a little bit to the Dunkirk evacuation there, where all these troops were evacuated thanks to the support of the civilian population, helping to get these troops off so they could continue to fight in other campaigns. Unfortunately, Crete was not a safe haven, as the Germans had Crete in its sights next, and Less than a month later, Crete had also been evacuated, but once again the Australians and the New Zealanders, or I'll say this time the New Zealanders and Australians, because the Kiwis were the biggest force in numbers in that campaign, fought fought big rearguard actions to support other troops getting off the island. So German paratroopers played a big role in the campaign in Crete. The Kiwis and Aussies fought rearguard actions, but once again there was an inevitable, and less than a month later, Crete had to be evacuated as well. There was one particular rearguard action where the Australian 2nd 7th Battalion and the New Zealand Maori Battalion fought a big rearguard action that allowed other troops to get to the evacuation point. About 15,000 troops were evacuated from Crete to Egypt by the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. In particular, HMAS Perth was one of the big players in that, and it actually got bombed while evacuating troops. Yeah, so around 15,000 troops got evacuated, but 12,000 remained on Crete to become prisoners of the Germans. So the ANZAC involvement in Greece and Crete lasted around 2 months, but the outcome was inevitable from the start. The overwhelming German and Italian army with the panzers, the Air Force. So the Australians and New Zealand fought many rearguard actions along the way. One notable because of its historical value was the Thermopylae line, which New Zealanders held while the majority of the forces fell back. And if the Thermopylae line sounds familiar, if you remember many centuries earlier, the story of the Spartans holding a line, the Thermopylae line from the Persian attacks. So yeah, it's one of the many rearguard actions fought by the ANZAC troops. So those ANZACs and Commonwealth forces that made it off Crete were evacuated to Egypt and went on to fight many more campaigns after that in North Africa. Australian and Greek forces joined together to continue fighting in the North African campaign, in particular the Battle of El Alamein. Bear in mind that while all this was happening, as per my last podcast episode, the siege of Tobruk was happening, so there's a lot happening in the Mediterranean area. And then towards the end of 1941, the Japanese had entered the war. The Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor. The Pacific was becoming a threat, and many Australian troops were called back to Australia to take part in the campaigns in the Pacific and New Guinea. So there you go, just a little, I guess, an intro into quite a short campaign, but quite a major campaign that ANZACs were involved in World War II. So look, thanks for listening, guys. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any other parts about Australian military history you would like me to talk about, please give me a yell. Pop something in the comments below. I enjoy actually researching for these episodes. I learn things myself as well, so feel free to pop comments in the comment section. So thanks for listening, guys, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.